They said, oh no, there's no room everywhere between here and like Houston. There's no room at all. So we're here, and I think some people will come and go and whatever. A number of you have written me who are on a waiting list, and I have said to everyone so far, it hasn't been too large a number, that anyone who waits around long enough usually gets on, because people shift around and they come and go, you know. I guess they discover they're not going to get enlightened by taking a class in Buddhism, and they leave in despair or something. I don't know why. And, okay, so any questions anybody has about the syllabus? Those of you who are enrolled, some of you I know have looked already at the syllabus. Even because one of you gave me some great corrections about page numbers and some missing things in one of the weeks. I was really pleased with that. I finally fixed it today. So does anybody have any questions about anything before I start with the kind of introduction? No? Nobody has a lot. You can, if you think of one as you're looking at the syllabus, and if you want to see something specific on the syllabus. I want to introduce the two teaching fellows. Where are they? Where'd they go? Oh yeah, this is Ted Arnold and Ibad Rahman. These two, and they one of the big things of the first 2 weeks is sorting out the. There's a couple more chairs up here, and there's one there. Sorting out the times for the discussion section. Since this is a 4-credit course, there's one here at the end.
Thank you.
One here. This is it's a required thing to have a discussion section. And so I see one more person. Did you find the chair? Yeah, you found it. Okay, good. The room is too small. But, oh, you can sit there.
Oh, there's no chair.
There's a chair's broken.
Chair's broken? Oh, okay. So that's terrible, really. Oh yeah, there's no chair. Okay, so maybe there's a few chairs in the back. Okay, so and there's another chair. Good. And there's maybe I can release this chair and get more people. Okay, in case somebody else comes, and they're likely to. Okay, so what are we doing here? My favorite expression in the history of American politics was the famous, probably you are all too young to have noticed, during the debate between the vice presidents of H.W. Bush and Clinton in '92, Ross Perot's vice president, Admiral something or other, when he got his turn to talk, he said, "Where am I? What am I doing here?" And this was made very much fun of on Saturday Night Live. In those days, I still watched that. And that the greatest statement ever made in American politics. It was honest one. So where are we doing? Well, we are looking at Indo-Tibetan Buddhism. Originally, this course was designed to fit with another course in the department called East Asian Buddhism, which especially focused on China, Korea, and Japan, usually mainly only China and Japan, a little bit Korea. And it used to be so that the person could do this huge number of things in institutions. Oh dear, now we're a chair short. Huge number of things that are under the name Buddhism. Just like, under the word Christianity, there's like all huge variety all over the planet. So Buddhism was maybe the most numerous of the world religions before Chinese communist change in Chinese culture. And now it's still like hundreds of millions. And so therefore we divided in the department of these two things, the Indo-Tibetan and actually Mongolian connects a little bit to that. And in the Indian part of the Indo, because we spend about 10 weeks in India really, we only get to Tibet in the last 4 or 5 weeks. And the India part also relates to Sri Lanka, Thailand, Burma, all those other Theravada, which nowadays are Theravada countries. But in the old days, they were connected to India, and the forms of Buddhism that evolved in India evolved in all those countries in the first millennium of the Common Era. And so it's sort of that part of Buddhism. And then the East Asian part, starting with China, we usually do it in other things. So I don't touch on that here. There is another course, and I think they moved it lately due to various faculty patterns. They moved it to this same semester. So if someone's particularly interested in Chinese, Korean, or Japanese Buddhism, then you should go to that other class. I don't know when it meets exactly. I think probably Michael Como is teaching it. So this is the Indian original time of Buddhism, and then it's the transposition of that into Tibet, and then from Tibet into Mongolia. So why do we study it now? Yeah, we study this in a religious studies department. Why is there a religious studies department? Some people in natural sciences in this faculty. Uh-oh. Okay. Well, do your best. There's the window seats here, over here. Just don't fall out. Keep the windows mostly closed. And yes, so it's considered a religion. But actually, how is a religion defined? Anybody give me a quick definition of religion? Can somebody do that? What is a religion? What makes something a religion? Anybody have a anthropological? Oh yeah, so good. What?
It's an allegiance for a particular set of beliefs.
A what?
A particular set of beliefs in the supernatural or extraterrestrial.
I couldn't catch that. Did you hear?
A particular set of beliefs in the supernatural, I think.
Oh,
or
okay.
other things.
Yeah, well, set of beliefs. That's yes. Usually, it's defined as a belief system, and then also a behavior system that goes with the belief system. Usually, some rituals and ethics and things in society, but the belief system is usually the thing, and what people say. And Buddhism has a belief system in a way. Although in a way, there's sort of two layers of Buddhism, you could say. In the layer of the uneducated Buddhists, which were the majority, huge majority in Asia over the last over several thousands of years, who were not sort of doing the study that was recommended to the professionals, you could say, the monks and nuns. And those were agricultural societies, and the majority were country people. And they believed that what was happening in the Buddhist monasteries and nunneries and universities was good, and they believed that something good was going on. So in a way, for them, it was a belief system, and of course, an ethical system and a behavioral system in the sense that it would congregate on certain days and so forth. But the educated Buddhists, which were usually the mendicants, except for a few wealthy people in wealthy classes in the different societies, the educated ones didn't really take it as a belief system. They took it as an unbelief system, actually. And it was a process of developing a kind of doubting, actually, the canons of the society, elaborating for oneself the purpose of life and the cosmology and etc. All of those things that surround one in one sort of worldview. And so it was a worldview that the one thing that they asked for belief in was the causality. So Buddha is credited in the tradition as the discoverer of causation, which is a really odd thing for a religion. How would you have a religion? Because religions usually say, well, an omnipotent deity created everything. They solve the problem that way, or it almost always that way, or some sort of notion of nature. So the educated form of Buddhism is more like a university system, education system, a de-indoctrination and a recalibration of a human being according to a certain path and according to the Buddha's discovery, which I'll come to later. So already when we look at Buddhism as a religion, it complicates the category of religion in the sense that it has a religious aspect and a educational or scientific aspect. Now, why do we study religions on campuses? Actually, in America, religion departments are a phenomenon that basically only came into existence after the Second World War. Before that, they didn't exist on campuses. There were people who studied religious literature and texts, in different departments, history departments, literature departments, and so on. But there was no such thing as a sort of special study of religion. And it's interesting that it arose around the time that America decided it was the heir to the Anglo-Franco-European colonial empire, and America was the new empire. So we began to do what people in empires do, which is try to learn about the people under our protection, let's call it. Let's make it nice. Like the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, its motto is "Knowledge is power," and so that's where they went to study the languages of the empire, the different people they had conquered in the empire. And we supposedly don't conquer people, and in a way we don't in the same way once we get off this continent, but we, in a way, we do on the heir of that empire. So we're learning about these things. So therefore, the study of religion. My point. Why? Because the religion, dominant religion of a culture, of a society, of a civilization even, we could say, is what structures the consciousness of the people in that society. In other words, what are they doing there? Why are they members of that society? What does it mean to be a human being? What does the world mean? Type of thing. This usually is the province of religion. And I had a good friend of mine, I still haven't, but I haven't seen him in a long time, is a well-known sociologist who sometimes is called a sociologist of knowledge, sometimes sociologist of religion. Peter Berger is his name. If any of you are any of you religion majors, by the way? Undergraduate religion majors? No? None? Oh, that's too bad. Well, you would have read Peter Berger if you were. He and I decided that religious studies should be, in academia, should be called nomology studies. Makes it sound scientific and like it's supposed to be there instead of like some sort of leftover from church. And but nomos means the norms or the rules, the guiding rules of a society. So nomology would be the study of those rules of different societies. So, for example, if you want to understand Chinese civilization, you should really know something about Confucianism, Taoism, and Chinese Buddhism, which was present there for 2,000 years, still in. Although in spite of Mao's best efforts to crush it, it still flourishes there, actually. And if you want to understand Europe, you have to understand Christianity, Judaism, etc., to the Middle East, Islam. So then you can get a sense of what is the central kind of core structuring of consciousness and social rules and legitimizing of those rules when you study religion. So they're they evolve, and the discipline, some religious studies scholars like to say we have a special discipline, but most of them don't say that. You need to really be a full-rounded religious studies scholar. You have to be a philosopher, you have to be a philologist, which you probably never heard of, which means someone dealing with languages and ancient languages. You have to have social science, both sociology and anthropology, kind of angle of looking at how people's behavior and how society's rules are affected by their worldview, by their ideologies. And you have to be a historian, all of those things. And and maybe a psychologist, and maybe some kind of, I don't know, but psychologist definitely. So all of those things, and to master the religious studies discipline, then you read like Max Weber, Schleiermacher first, then Max Weber, then Durkheim, these kind of people, sociologists, and you read Freud, and for psychology and other writings since then, and you have to really come at it from multiple angles. And they don't actually make you read philosophy, unfortunately, but they should. And the others are anthropologists and sociologists. For example, the definition of religion, the famous anthropologist Clifford Geertz is the one who, system of beliefs and system of behaviors, ritual behaviors relating to those beliefs. He came up with basically that idea. Okay, so the study of religions is the study of civilizations, basically. And in the process of doing that, to study it well, it's actually helpful in a way in that we don't think, when we're brought up in a certain culture with a certain kind of sense of history and reality, we don't really think that it's a structure. We just think we're somehow, our culture is very realistic, and we're we're reading reality in a certain way, especially this materialist culture that we live in is very, natural scientists are the ones who are telling us what reality is. Your sense of reality is not really formed in church or your synagogue or your mosque or your temple or wherever you go sort of in a religious, when your family's in a religious mood. It's really formed in your science classes because they purport to be telling you what reality is, I think. So that's where you get reality, And that used to come, so it's sort of complicated a little bit in this modern society. And that's all based on evidence, right? They're just meeting material reality. There's no non-evidenced thing that they put forth as reality, right? You agree with that? Let's see, we'll talk about it. So that's the thing. Now, in the case of, to introduce Buddhism in particular, Buddhism is an odd religion. Wilfred Cantwell Smith, who was one of the early great scholars of religious studies, Canadian, but taught at Harvard for a long time. And he used to say there were three great missionary religions in history: Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam. Those three. And he excluded Judaism, Hinduism, Confucian, Taoism, which is kind of one thing in a way, or there are many varieties within it. He excluded them because they're sort of nation-specific. And that's what he meant by missionary, in the sense that the others were teachings, came along with teachings that were seemingly, or beliefs, that were seemingly applicable to everybody. In other words, everyone thinks, if they're Buddhist, according to his idea, if they're Buddhist, Christian, or Muslim, that everybody really should adopt that view, because that's the best view. That's what they sort of think. And that makes them, they're spreadable to other cultures. The other religions, so-called world religions, you have to be kind of born there, So studying Buddhism gives you kind of it's complicated because, like Christianity and Islam, it went in many different cultures and countries. And of course, Buddhists themselves vehemently deny their missionary religion because basically they're like, in other words, is liberal education a missionary religion, for example? You all are undergraduates at Columbia and you're supposed to develop critical mindedness, skills in writing and reading and being critical, and investigation of reality and some sort of sense of ethics. Although the ethics courses are few and far between, but when at convocation and at graduation, you'll hear the college president mumbling about decency and this sort of thing before you go off to Wall Street and conquer everything. and so it's supposedly part of liberal education. So liberal education, in other words, seeks to allow people to change their consciousness, indeed, and to be more critical about where they grew up. I used to teach at Amherst College before I came here for a decade or so, and we had a number of students who came there from sort of fundamentalist backgrounds. And I discovered after years of teaching there, one student did a senior journal, which was the first time I had seen one of those. And they said about how every time they would come to one of my classes, which they did by requirement to study something about Asia, they would go to the chapel and pray to be safe from thinking critically, about religion. And I wasn't teaching Christianity either, but they somehow just made them think or something about things, And so religious studies, and in fact, on these kind of campuses like Columbia, Harvard, big quote-unquote research university, there are members of our faculty who wonder why there is a religious studies department here, or a religion department, or whatever you call it. And they kind of wonder, because what would that be? Are they preaching or something? Are they what, But then it's complicated because there's somebody from every different tradition. And then during my time, in the last 50 years or 45 years or so that I've been teaching, the sort of idea changed. It used to be, if you were a professor and your field of study was some sort of Asian religion, Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Confucianism, or even Islam, which was considered not the WASP religion, then if you were born in that tradition, it was okay. You could be a scholar and professor in that, and you couldn't help that you were born in Korea or Japan or India or Arabia or something. But if you were born in the West, like an American, like a WASP or something like that, then and you followed the religion, then that was not possible. That was a danger. In other words, you had to be either a materialist secularist, which is one of our religions in this culture, or a Christian in those days, at Harvard Divinity or the Yale Divinity, this kind of place, Chicago Divinity. And then you could safely teach the non-Western religions. You could safely teach them. And you couldn't do that if you somehow liked them. You had to basically dislike them. And then you'd be cool, then you'd be cool. And people would be safe. And that's because the study of this kind of thing takes one into a place where one reflects on what is my culture, what do I think is real, why do I think so, etc. And it's a, it's a very good kind of thing to do as an undergraduate, as a liberal studies major, if you are doing that, and if you're able to do that. Although everyone is, I know, pre-law, pre-med, pre-biochemist, pre-whatever it is, I know pretty much nowadays because of the financial situation of studying. And it's not anybody's fault. It's the way it is nowadays. Okay. Now when I was a student at your age, I had a professor up at Harvard who used to spend the first class telling people, because he would teach a course like this, like a survey of Buddhism, historical survey of Buddhism, and he would say, and this was in the 60s, and he would say, now get out of here if you're seeking enlightenment. We don't do that here. He would say, he was Japanese actually, and he was actually a Buddhist. But the first thing he would say, and he would spend quite a while at it, he would say, don't seek enlightenment here. You're not going to become a Buddha in this class. You're going to find out what Buddhists think and did and do, etc., history and those kind of things. And which was nice, but I was thinking today, actually, it isn't when you study Buddhism, but here, everything you study should be a quest of enlightenment, actually. All of you. Everything you do. Anything that you're studying is not in pursuit of enlightenment, you shouldn't bother with it. What is it going to make you stupider? I mean, why are you studying if it's not increasing your consciousness? It's not just a matter either of the liberal education. It's not a matter only of acquiring more information, like you have a set mind and brain, and you have an IQ, and then you're going to process, and then you go to college and get lots of information. That's ridiculous. Your brain is not plugged into Google day and night. There's all the information there. Although you did memorize some things, I hope, in your younger school. I don't know your generation, whether you were forced to memorize, or maybe people said, oh no, we don't do memorization because it's all on Google. I've heard that said. That's too bad. Memorizing is a special kind of virtue, the ability to memorize, and one should cultivate that, actually. But the point is that in education, you're changing with that with which you are knowing things. Your own awareness, your sensibility, your sensitivity, you're developing critical thinking, you're expanding your sensitivity and your awareness. So you actually are becoming more enlightened, like it or not. Maybe you don't like it. Some people are scared of it, certain types of people, and therefore they don't learn anything. We have a very prominent one in our view now who cannot read a page, as we know. But that's a kind of illness rather than anything good. So anyway, liberal education is about becoming more rational and reasonable, which means being reasonable about elements of life, emotion, and otherwise, and aesthetic taste and things that are not necessarily super rational. More conscious and critical-minded, more decent and more ethical, more tolerant by deconstructing prejudices, also one of the big jobs of liberal education. However, so that's the thing. So now, coming to Buddhism in its historical setting, what do you, when you walk across the campus, what do you see up on the plinth of, that's what it's called, on the top of the wall, Butler Library? Who is up there? Bunch of Greek guys and one or two Romans, all guys, right? They're all up there. One student of mine once, after a while in one of my courses, they came in and they said, wow, Professor Thurman, I see what you mean. He said, I was walking across the campus the other day, I took a look at Butler Library, and I thought it looked like a Greek restaurant. I was very pleased by that. And so, Arnold Toynbee, you probably have heard of, famous historian. He wrote 12 volumes, sort of world history kind of person, British. And then he wrote a summary of that, which is in the latest version. It dropped out of my recommended readings, but I put it back in today, called Mankind and Mother Earth. And then he follows a German historian named Karl Jaspers, who came up with the phrase, I hope not with a sinister purpose, because of the time and the era in Germany, but he called it the axial age. But what he meant by this axial age idea is that about 2,500 years ago, although a more recent book on this by the much beloved Karen Armstrong calls it the Great Transformation, she rates it from 900 BCE, before the Common Era, which what we do in religious studies, we never say BC or AD, we say BCE and CE. About 900 to 200 BCE, they've expanded. It used to be like 2,500, like middle of the first millennium before the Common Era. And that's where the proprietors of the Greek restaurant over at Butler, that's their era, more or less, you know. Euripides, you know, pre-Socratics, then later, a little bit later, Socrates, Plato, and then the Talmud was collected around that time in Babylon by what was going to be called Deutero-Isaiah. Then in India, they had the Upanishadic people who were kind of rebelling against Vedic ritualism, previous form of Vedism, as I call it. People want to say Hinduism, but it isn't really Hinduism yet. It's Vedism, and quite different from modern Hinduism. And rebelling against that, there were some sages, you know, who were Upanishadic, who founded the Upanishads. None of them are, in no single one of them is that famous. And Mahavira, who founded Jainism, and Buddha. And then in China, you have Confucius, for sure, and then Lao-Tzu, although one thing Westerners constantly do is they constantly try to move all these characters later in history. I think they're trying to get them to catch up with Jesus, I think, actually, is the underlying motive. So that he's not 500 years later than these axial age people. That makes them jumpy, I think, subliminally, subconsciously. And so they're always like, oh no, it must have been a little later. There's a text that says only this many years. Whereas in some of the Asian people think of them as 800 BCE, etc. They put them way further back. And nobody really knows these exact dates. And even nobody really knows. And there was a Greek king who was left over from Alexander, who in Pakistan area, what now is Pakistan, but that's Western India, and who was talking to a Buddhist monk, and he said, how did you know that Buddha ever existed? Did you meet Buddha, etc.? Because Buddha himself, in critiquing some Brahmins who believed in Brahma, the creator, he kept saying, well, did you ever meet the creator? Did you see the creator? Have you met God? And this kind of thing. And it's sort of used. So he tries to use that against the Buddhist monk. And he says, why do you think there even was such a person as Buddha? You just have a bunch of books and they say Buddha said this and that. Why do you think that? Very sort of modern, text-critical, demythologizing, as we say in religious studies, kind of question. This is in 3rd century before the Common Era, this Greek king. His name was Menander. And the guy says, well, I don't know. And maybe there was no such person. He's fine with that. There's no problem. It doesn't bother him. You know, it's because it's an anti-fundamentalist type of attitude, you see. But then he does have a counter-argument. He says, well, Your Majesty, if you were riding with your armies and you were coming to a new place to conquer, and you looked down and saw a city by a river or something that had perfectly laid out streets and plazas and grand avenues and in a geometrical grid, well, you would say there was a city planner, wouldn't you? And he says, yeah, that looks like a planned city, you know, not like just like winding streets and things just higgledy-piggledy the way they are in older towns. And so just by that, I still think there might have been a Buddha, said the guy. But in a way, it's not a problem for me because I'm using the teaching. So whatever the teaching to me seems efficacious, that guy answered, you know. And that's kind of interesting because in modern religious studies, it's considered a big thing in the 19th century that the European scholars, you know, sort of semi-theologians, semi-religious studies scholars, began to think, well, maybe Jesus didn't say this, or maybe Jesus didn't say that, you know, sort of thing, you know, what they called it demythologizing. And of course, they had to specially demythologize because they can't imagine something supernatural, like a resurrection, or something magical, or something that doesn't fit in their materialist canon of reality. So demythologizing means like that, right? the Moses moving the Red Sea and this sort of thing. It couldn't have happened. Couldn't have been a special weird tide there. So they were very pleased with that, and they consider that a hallmark of modernity. So how come in this tradition were they doing that 2,200 years before modernity? How can that be? It doesn't fit, you see. It doesn't fit. They were willing to say, oh yeah, there might not have been a Buddha, but I don't care because it's the teaching that's important. And I'm using that teaching, Yeah, I said. But anyway, back to this axial age thing. The essence of the axial age, and there's an assignment that you have in the early reading in a book called History Textbook made for high school students, but very, very useful for most people who come to college nowadays, because who come out of the modern type of education high school system. And it's called Comparative History of Civilization in Asia. You'll see that there. And they show, people are familiar with the periodization of Western history. The Roman Empire, the Macedonian Empire, blah, blah, blah. And Athens, that's all part of the mythology of being a Euro-American. And so then they parallel that with things that happened in Asia. For kids who never heard, like how many of you know what the Tang Dynasty was? Or the Han Dynasty? Well, some of you know if you're from that culture, but other people? How many people have ever heard of the Han Dynasty and could tell me apart? Oh wow, look at that. That's terrific. But you older folks, I'm not impressed. But these young kids, I'm really happy. That's good. And the Maurya Dynasty in India, how many? Much less, I bet. Yeah. That's a very interesting thing. Why is it that there's such a good knowledge of China in America, but not India? Does anybody have a theory? I always wonder, In the departments, we have huge East Asian thing. The Indian one is all squeezed up there with the Middle East and Africa and stuff here. Very little thing. That's not even a real Indian historian on the faculty of Columbia. Why is that? Does anybody know? You have a theory? Yes.
PBS.
Yes?
PBS.
We what?
PBS.
Oh, I couldn't.
Channel 13.
I have a hearing thing with my hearing aid, but so
PBS.
you have to sort of transmit it up like you're in Occupy Wall Street.
She said PBS.
What did she say?
She said PBS.
PBS? No, it goes way back before that. I didn't understand for many years that I met a guy who was a long-time diplomatic person, and he explained to me, and I think he was right, and I sort of checked it. And that is the British. It's another British plot. The British weren't interested in keeping India and the US, and they were interested in keeping them apart. There was a guy called Tipu Sultan, who you may never have heard of, but he was the Gaddafi of the 19th century as far as the British were concerned. He was the Maharaja of Mysore, and he was a Francophile, and he didn't like the Brits taking over India. And he sent 3 chests of treasure, with more than weight of jewels, to the American revolutionaries against the British, none of which arrived. They were all stolen by the captains on the ships that he trusted them. So none of them did arrive to the U.S. But and then also there's a famous vote that this guy mentioned to me that in the British Parliament around the time of the Revolutionary War here in America, where someone, whose name I'm sorry I can't tell you which prime minister or which foreign minister ever it was, said to the assembled grandees, said, which do you prefer? Dried mangoes, spices, silks, chutney, whatever, curries, or furs and timber and tobacco. Which is more important to your life? And they all said, oh, by golly, spices, yes, and jewels. And so they said, well, that's good, because we have so many divisions, and we could either send enough divisions to reinforce Cornwallis and crush those upstarts over there in the Americas, in the colonies, or we can take over India. Which is it? Which is it to be? So then they shipped to India, and they let us win, supposedly, temporarily, let the U.S. win. That's the story. So anyway, because of all of that, the Brits wouldn't allow American missionaries into India in the 19th century. They just wouldn't let it happen while they controlled. No missionaries. All the missionaries went to save China. The grandchildren of those missionaries are all the famous sinologists in all the American colleges, and from some of the European ones too, because they grew up, in those countries as children and grandchildren of the missionaries. So that's why India is like, what? Why didn't India actually realized that India, if it hadn't been divided by the Brits along the Muslim-Hindu lines imperfectly, since it's not really divided that much, is of course the most populous and the biggest clump of people on the planet today, more than China, about 400 million more, something like that. If you add back Bangladesh and Pakistan, you'd have like 1.8 billion or something like that. And in ancient time, it always was, which is why the British, it was their crown and their jewel. So that's I know that's a bit of a digression, but we were therefore looking at India. So India, in a way, is a kind of Maurya dynasty. It's a very important dynasty. It's when the first emperor, moving beyond city-state to empire, Ashoka became a patron of Buddhism, and it started spreading very powerfully in India in the 3rd century before the Common Era. So after the time of Alexander, after his grandfather, that guy was emperor because his grandfather had pushed back Alexander and didn't allow Alexander into India really properly. So that's kind of important. So, so what does this axial age consist of? In this history book, you will see they talk of ethical reformers. And I remember when I first looked at it, I was so surprised that they were making Buddha only like an ethical reformer, like not a philosopher, but an ethical reformer. But in a way, that's right from the historian's point of view. And remember the Trojan War, everybody? Trojan War, that India has its Trojan, it has its Iliad, let's say, called the Mahabharata, which is 35 times longer than the Iliad. But that's typical because it was a bigger place with more people. And then China has the Book of Histories. It doesn't have it quite exactly like that, but it has a Book of Histories, which is similar. And what those are recording how the old tribal warrior ethic of, competing tribes with their heroes, their Hectors and their Achilles, who used to fight one another in a kind of heroic manner over territory in previous eras. Then, when they're armed with a city-state, they come into a larger, different economy, more powerful agricultural surplus-producing base in a river valley in an alluvium. And then, usually around a ritual center, some sort of temple or, a god or goddess place, a city forms. And then, when they come into that city, that king, the head warrior, has eventually professional military, specialization of crafts and trades, iron weapons. It starts to happen around that time, a little bit earlier than that, but around that time. And then their warrior hero ethic becomes like in the Trojan War. What happens in the Trojan War? Do they get back Helen and punish Paris and for partying too much, and get Helen back, and then go back to trading with Troy, and through Troy to Asia? Do they? No, they eradicate Troy. They try to genocide all the Trojans. They completely exterminate the place. So that they never did in the old tribal days. They would conquer and defeat, and maybe heroes would decide it, rather than everybody getting killed, because the others are working at a subsistence livelihood. But when a sort of macho, Rambo, Achilles type of hero gets a professional army behind them and a surplus and then wants to completely expand and has a growing population, then it becomes genocidal, this thing. So the set of things that the ethical reformers do, the way they demythologize the different specific tribal myths and remythologize them in a certain way, and influencing the kings, and then come up with, like Confucius used, Buddha used karma. Confucius used history. He talked about history. The Deutero-Isaiah used God and the power of God. And the Socratics, what did Socrates use? I don't know. He used Ritzika till they gave him the Hemlock milkshake for spoiling the troops, the football team, like going over and getting a football team to think about something rather than play ball. And but they use different things, and they've created an idea of nemesis in history. You'll read the sort of typology, which is very general, and of course it doesn't fit exactly into any particular thing, but it does really relate to this so-called axial age. And that axial, whoever was the teacher of that axial age, becomes in the culture the dominant person 2,500 years later. So everybody has to tackle Plato. Everybody has to tackle the Talmud or the Bible. Everybody has to tackle the Upanishads if they're Hindus. And if they're Buddhists, they have to tackle Buddha. So the people who gave teachings then, and some of the later ones who are following in their line, you have different renaissances within those traditions, their teachings are still not realized actually by, we now have city-state, we have the warrior ethic, city-state ethic, and, modern nation, superpower. We've now reached the level of superpower, and if we macho out and try to exterminate any other group, we will self-destruct, actually. So it's a whole new situation, actually. It isn't the old situation. But the fact that we feel like exterminating somebody if they want to get a nuclear weapon, or if they have a weird hairdo, or if they are nasty to some people locally, then we are manifesting those older qualities that axial age teachers, the so-called ethical reformers, were trying to help people control, and to transform, and to turn into something civilized, actually. And then this brings the topic of what is civilization. You think is civilization having Detroit, General Motors, Toyota, subways, toilets, etc.? Is that civilization? Monsanto, Cargill, after Daniel Smithland, producing the food, weird food. Is that civilization? World War II, World War I, is that civilization? Those are industrial. So we tend to think of civilization, modern industrial society as civilization. But we can see, and I think we're very alert to it just now, that industrial society can be savage. Just as savage as a bunch of tribal people, if not more so. And so what is civilization, basically? Does anybody want to give a quick definition of civilization? And you could use etymology. Civis means what? Civis, in a classical language. Civis, like civi. What does the CV come from? City means the city. Okay? And so somehow you have to have a different code to live in a city, because in a city people come in from the hinterland from all kinds of different tribes. Right? They come in from Arkansas, Tennessee, and New Jersey, and Connecticut, and they're really different. And then if they try to live like they do in their home tribe, and then the other's an alien, a potential enemy in the next block, etc., it won't work, right? So there are new skills they have to develop. And what are those new skills? Well, one of the skills is some kind of resilience of character, of sense of identity. They say when they first come in, they're still connected to their bloodline or their tribal line. But then they're in the city, then they're a citizen of the city. Then that they share that with people who come from other bloodlines and so forth. Then each one has a different witch doctor, different cosmogony, different descriptions of what life is and what the world is. And so, which one is correct? Well, or any of them, or maybe none of them are. In other words, you have to start thinking about it. You can't just say, okay, God did it, told me to do this, so I'm going to do that. And the priest told me that. And you start questioning that. And then you hear somebody else, well, my priest told me the other. And then, which is right? Maybe you might have a fight over it at first, but obviously the city cannot function if people are always fighting who have slightly different worldviews, right? So this kind of flexibility, resilience of identity, and also rationality, using reason to try to figure things out yourself, taking responsibility to figure them out, and sort of a kind of individualism that you didn't have in your small tribe, your kin-based tribe, where you just followed the law of the tribe. That's what whatever your parents did, whatever they told you to do, you did. If you dropouts would go out and have a vision quest or something outside in the woods and meet a totem and become a medicine man or woman, maybe. So that's what they had. That's what they took care of the dropouts. So basically, they couldn't afford much dropouts. They couldn't afford kids to go off and educate. They had to work and take care of the cows or whatever it was, or grow the food or gather the nuts. And the boys had to learn to fight. So this rationality kind of thing, which, by the way, for among sociologists, that's supposed to be a big category of modernity. Max Weber, Zweckrationalität, he calls it instrumental rationality. That's one of the big things of the Protestant ethic and the cultural and the Industrial Revolution, as far as sociologists go. But that's happening right away in these cities already. And then in city, you have different people you relate to differently. You're not just always in the same neighborhood with the same people. So you develop your ability, someone calls you professor, someone else calls him, hey you, someone else says, hey dopey or something, In other words, you have to be able to deal with that without freaking out. And of course, you have to have a restraint of anger and violence. You can't just react angrily and violently all the time. You have to develop a certain gentleness, right? You have the concept of a gentle person, right? So, and then there's the notion of, then law emerges, not just as some sort of thing from on high, but law as something practical that controls the interactions of people and so forth, etc. In other words, all of these things arise, which is what civilization really is. And that's why the axial age people, they had to explore, and the teachers of that time explored the different things and came up with different ways in those cultures of dealing with each other. And the reason I'm going through this is to say that when you encounter the Buddhist literature, which is what we will be encountering, and Buddhist history, their own history, as they understand it, then you are expanding sort of your database for the axial age. In other words, instead of just a Greek restaurant, you have a Eurasian restaurant. Now, the fact that it's a Eurasian restaurant, of course, is another very interesting thing. And for that, I put in there, which had dropped off. I noticed a lot of my recommended books had dropped off. But how many of you ever read a book of Jared Diamond called Guns, Germs, and Steel? Oh, good. Lots of you read that. I'm so happy. I hope you liked it. I like it. I liked it very much because it was a non-racist way of explaining why. It was like a geographical way of explaining why the Eurasian people in general are dominant on the planet now, even in the industrial framework of it. And the people from the Native American people, the American people, and the African and Australian Aborigines are not dominant. They're sort of hanging on, or adopting the way the ways of doing things received from the Eurasian people. So that's a very good work on that point. I like very much that work, although, like Americans, again, if you notice that work, among Eurasian people, he ignores the Indians. He's big on China, if you notice, and he deals with the nomads, the Mongolians, but he doesn't cope with India. Like, where was India? Oh, those guys were eating mangoes and just keeping calm or something. He doesn't really note the interaction of India. This is a blind spot that we all have actually, about India. It really is. India is such a key place, but we have a big blind spot about it. I'm looking for my hearing aid battery in case somebody says something. So when you have hearing aids, you're in the middle of something, and suddenly it's and you're all washed up. Okay, so those are the main points I wanted to say, but no, I didn't do anything like the detail that I wanted to do. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention Reischauer. I didn't put him in the syllabus yet, but I will. Edwin Reischauer, some of you may never have heard of him. He was a professor of Japanese civilization for a long time at Harvard. And then he was ambassador to Japan in the Kennedy period. And then he wrote a book called Toward the 21st Century, Education in a Changing World, maybe, like that subtitle. And in that, he talked about the 21st century. Everyone should get beyond the Greek restaurant in the West. And in China, they should get beyond the Chinese restaurant. And in India, they should get beyond the Indian restaurant. And in the Saudi Arabian thing, they should get beyond that restaurant when they learn. And because the periodization of all of these civilizational streams, is parallel, actually. And it, you know, like I think prehistoric period, there's a statement from this kind of cultural anthropologist that an innovation in the way an axe head is forged to fit on the wooden handle, you know, brass or something, axe head. An innovation in that is found in, you know, digs on the Sino, around the Great Wall of China, you know, the Sino-nomadic border, is reflected within about 15 years, according to their dating, or less than half a century, in the woods of Germany. So there was a lot more communication in ancient time than we know. So in a way, everyone should grow up reading some, you know, CC core curriculum instead of extended core and core curriculum. People should read Confucius. They should read the Upanishads. They should read Buddha. They should read some Persian, ancient Zoroastrian characters, and then they can read their Socrates and Plato and be Greek and go to a Greek restaurant. And this will then globalize the sort of sense of what's going on, you know, rather than Egypt also they have to bring in, you know. And they will do that at least, although it leaves out sub-Saharan Africa and the native people in the U.S. and in South America, the Incas, who had very advanced civilizations actually. The descriptions of them given by the conquistadores are likely highly warped to make them seem really horrible, to justify the extermination of them. This is always happens when people invade and conquer another people. They tell a history that they deserved it, you could say. They tried to. Okay, so that's it, I think. And we are expanding our database of the Excel age. And we then come down from that in India and Tibet until the present time. Okay, I think that's enough today for the initial time. And I'm sorry about the crowdedness of the room. I will go back again and ask about the room. And really, there was a bunch of waiting list people and waiting list people as well. And I feel sad about that.